Welcome to the Institute of Employment Rights Fact News General Election vlog. My name's Alex Just. I'm a former trade union barrister at Old Square Chambers, and today we're going to be having a look at this, the Conservative Party Manifesto. And Theresa May has made a big pitch for the votes from what she calls ordinary, hard-working people. And she's proposing a new deal for workers, which are anchored around 11 policies. The first of which is to guarantee the workers enjoy the same rights after Brexit as they do under existing EU law. There's not very many specifics on this. We do know that the government in the Great Repeal Bill, draft bill that we saw a few months ago, are giving themselves pretty sweeping powers, known as Henry VIII powers, to modify lots of the regulations that currently come in from EU law through secondary legislation. Now, what that means is that the government won't have to put specific provisions that protect workers' rights at the moment. For example, the Working Time Directive. Those and workers who are agency workers, for example, who currently might receive some rights that are part of EU law. The government has the ability under the Great Repeal Bill to, by statutory instrument, fiddle around with all sorts of those bits of legislation. And that means that there wouldn't be a full debate in the House of Commons. There wouldn't have to be anything that would potentially go up to the House of Lords in the same way that a bill would. And so on that first point, it's not clear at all that the Tories are really going to maintain all those legal protections that workers have had for many years under EU law after Brexit takes place. Secondly, they've said, the Conservatives, that they would increase the national living wage in line with earnings until the end of Parliament. Now, it's not really a living wage. It's a rebranding that George Osborne undertook a few years ago of the national minimum wage. It's significantly lower in terms of its actual figures than what a living wage would be, and it's calculated at the moment, based on between 55%, it's going to go up to 60% of median earnings by 2020. So it's not available, firstly, to millions of workers who are under the age of 25, and it doesn't reflect the cost of living. So if living costs increase, if, for example, after Brexit there's more inflation, if earnings continue to stay fairly repressed, as they have been in recent years, then actually the amount of money going into somebody's pocket under the national living wage is not going to keep pace with that. So on that, perhaps it's not as good a deal as it seems. Now, the next area that the Conservatives have talked about is in terms of the gig economy, trying to protect workers and giving wider consultation rights. Most of this is based on the Taylor Review, which is being undertaken and is due to publish its findings in the summer. What we do know is that Matthew Taylor strongly believes in increasing workplace democracy, and one thing that's quite in contrast to the IER's Manifesto for Labour Law is that traditionally workplace democracy has involved workers being able to have their views channelled through their trade union representatives, and something which the Tory manifesto certainly doesn't do is get around any of the very restrictive measures that were part of the Trade Union Act in 2016, which massively reduce trade unions' powers and potentially the rights of unions to organise. There have already been attacks on facilities time for trade union reps to go out and talk to their members in workplaces, and so it would seem that a lot of this, again, is potentially just rhetoric. It's also not clear at the moment what the Tories mean when they talk about giving protections to workers, when employment tribunal fees are still going to be part of the broader industrial relations system. So it's not very much good if some people who are working for Uber or Deliveroo are given employment rights, if there is a change in the law like that under a Conservative government, if they cannot then take a claim because of tribunal fees of up to £1,200. The next couple of areas are to do with worker representations on company boards and giving workers the same right of information as other people associated with the company, such as a shareholder. Again, there's been a real watering down. This was something Theresa May said on the steps of Downing Street in one of her first speeches when she became Prime Minister, was that she wanted for workers to become more involved in companies, to sit on the boards, as is very common in industrial places in Europe, like in Germany. But now it seems that she's watered that down. Instead, it would just have one, I think, non-executive director who would be designated as an employee representative, and then a variety of stakeholder advisory panels that would sit and engage with staff. But there won't actually be workers on the board, and trade unions certainly won't have a statutory role in running companies. And that's, again, probably suggesting that on this level, there's a bit less change to the status quo than the Tories would like to make people believe. In terms of rights to information, that doesn't seem to take us much further. It's unclear, again, how workers having more knowledge about how a company is running is going to be very useful to protect their rights if they aren't able to organise effectively because of changes that have been made to their trade union, and again, if they don't have the ability to collectively negotiate because of the lack of any real engagement with sectoral collective bargaining, which is something that Professor Keith Ewing and John Hendy have written about at length in the IER's manifesto, and certainly we'll have a look at some of the other parties who do seem to be engaging more with that. The Conservatives have then proposed two more rights: the right to request leave for training and the right to take unpaid leave to care for sick relatives. It seems that both of these are going to come with no pay attached, so again, companies will be able to let people go off if they want to retrain or indeed to care for their relatives, but it's not going to be something that's going to be particularly attractive, I wouldn't have thought, to that many workers, because they're going to have to fund it themselves effectively, or in the case of becoming carers, they'd have to live on the carers allowance, which is currently just over £60 a week. There is then also a right to child bereavement leave, which is 2 weeks of paid leave if somebody loses a child. I think that, again, is something that is to be welcomed. It is compassionate leave that is often offered by companies, but enshrining that in law seems sensible and a good policy. And the other issue is in relation to health and the workplace, is that the Conservatives have proposed extending the Equality Act to cover people with mental health conditions. There is some sort of suggestion that that's currently something that's covered under the Equality Act, because your rights to not have an employer discriminate against you on the grounds of disability would, on the whole, cover somebody who has a serious mental illness that has an impact on their day-to-day life. But perhaps in some cases where that's not completely clear as to whether or not they'd be defined as disabled, the change in the law that the Conservatives are proposing may help somewhat. And finally, there's been suggestions that people who want to come back to the workplace after they've had children should be able to undertake what the Conservatives are describing as returnships. This bill builds on a commitment that was made in the spring budget to put £5 million into this type of scheme. It's already been taken up by some big employers such as Vodafone, and although it is something that's going to have to be there and supported really by employers, it's not necessarily going to, again, do all that much for women in the workplace who are having issues with enforcing their rights at work, because the fundamental question of them being able to claim sex discrimination or discrimination on the grounds of having kids is lost by the tribunal fees that were brought in by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems during the coalition government. So we've seen empirically that the number of people who are bringing claims for sex and pregnancy discrimination has gone down almost 80% since the fees have been introduced. So to that extent, I think the Conservatives saying that they've got a new deal for working mothers and have improved their employment rights doesn't necessarily add up. So that was a very quick summary of what we've seen from Theresa May. We're going to be looking in future vlog posts at what the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats have said, and then when we have the fully published manifestos from some of the other parties, we'll be looking at those too. But do click on the link below to go to the Fact News section of the IER website. There are articles that have been written by a number of experts associated with the Institute that go into a bit more detail on some of these policies, and there's also a great article that dissects some of the rights which I've just looked at in a bit more detail.